If you hear an inhuman voice in the deep desert night call out your full name with eerie precision, do not answer. At the desolate Victor outpost, we thought our only enemies were armed militants. But at 3 in the morning, every piece of electronics and every generator died in an instant, inexplicably silent. A creature defying biological logic, skimming the ground at high speed, crept up to our watchtower. The most chilling part, within minutes, it not only learned English but also spoke the full name of the soldier beside me. I'd been in this desert for 17 months. I'd never seen anything like it. That night, I was on duty at Observation Post 3. My partner was a private first class named Derek Henderson from Abilene, Texas. He'd been in the service 9 months, first deployment. He gripped an M16A4. His night vision goggles flipped up on his helmet, eyes straining into the dark as if he could pierce the void with his bare gaze. He hadn't yet learned how to read a desert night. The desert night isn't black. It's a murky gray, like faded black cloth draped before your eyes. Stars blaze too bright, and moonlight bleaches the sand bone white. If you stare long enough, you can tell whether a shadow is a withered bush or a figure crawling low. Henderson couldn't. Every bush swaying in the wind he reported as a potential threat. Voice hushed as if afraid of being overheard. I said, "Take it easy, Derek. The only thing I've heard on the radio tonight is a platoon patrol 7 clicks southeast spotted a stray dog. That's it." Henderson didn't answer. His jaw was tight. Nothing moved on the eastern horizon except fine sand blown by the wind, skimming the ground like low fog. It's common in the desert. We call it a sand blanket. When temperatures drop at night, the ground releases heat, lifting light sand into a flowing curtain about a foot high. It looks eerie, but you get used to it. That night, the blanket was thicker than usual, maybe from a mild dust storm earlier in the day. The first hour was routine.
Iludja, 0230, no anomalías.
0245 radio check normal. 0300, 2 hours until shift change. I've thought about the question I've asked myself all these years. Why me? Why that night? Military archives have no record. No one wants to talk about it. Even today, when I bring it up at the Veterans Support Group, people look away, as if the words from my mouth carry some contagion. I've been advised to see a shrink. Combat stress reaction, they say. It's common. I don't think it's stress, because Henderson saw it too, and he wasn't the only one. Let me start from the beginning. That October, we relieved an Army unit stationed at Victor Outpost. During the turnover briefing, the Army captain said in a flat tone, "Occasionally, you'll find animal tracks on the perimeter, larger than typical canines, active at night. Don't waste ammo." That was it. No further explanation, no formal intelligence report. We didn't think much of it. Desert, after all, jackals, stray dogs, maybe even camels from northern villages. What's the big deal? Victor Outpost had a total strength of 114 personnel, 83 combat troops, the rest logistics, communications, and medical support. We had 3 Humvees, 2 fitted with M2 heavy machine guns, 1 carrying a TOW anti-tank missile system. Around the base, 6 observation posts were set up. Post 3 was the farthest, about 300 meters from the main camp, connected by a gravel path. By day, the heat made you want to peel off your own skin. The dry air cracked your lips and nasal passages. The water from the cooler always tasted of chlorine and plastic, but you drank it because dehydration was worse. Flies swarmed in clouds. Sand fleas burrowed between your boots and socks, raising rows of bites on your ankles. Daily tasks were mind-numbingly dull. Patrol, report, guard, patrol again, report again. Rules of engagement were strict. No firing unless you confirmed armed hostiles posing a direct threat to the base. Night was a different matter. The desert shed its heat fast once the sun dipped, plunging from over 50 degrees Celsius to near freezing. You'd bundle yourself in a cold weather jacket, your breath fogging into white mist, your fingertips still numb inside gloves. The crux of it was the night belonged to them. The local militants knew every gully, every dry riverbed in this stretch of sand. They could creep to within 200 meters of our position without moonlight, planting IEDs or lobbing mortar rounds. This was before I understood what fear truly was. I want to pause here to say something I only grasped later. In a combat zone, you pick up a peculiar kind of knowledge, one not taught in manuals or orders. It's about distance and perception, how you locate yourself in the world. By day, the sun blazes straight down, casting your shadow sharp at your feet. Boundaries are clear. This is rock. This is a vehicle. This is your buddy. That's a gully where the enemy might hide. Everything can be measured, calculated, defended. But at night, that line blurs. I mean every line. The line between light and shadow, friend and foe, reality and hallucination. Peering through night vision goggles, the world is bathed in a sickly green phosphor glow. Edges warp from image intensification, as if objects themselves are swelling faintly. You can't tell if that distant speck of light is a man's flashlight, some mineral glint under starlight, or a phantom conjured by your exhausted brain. This is what I call the haze. Not real fog, the desert rarely has fog. I mean a mental haze, a murky film overlaying reason and logic. It makes you doubt what you see, yet it opens a door for something to slip through, as if the darkness itself were a screen, projecting the fears we suppress in waking hours into flesh and blood shapes. Henderson later said, "That thing seemed to know it. It used it. I didn't get it then. Now I think I do." We weren't up against a threat you could define by a combat manual. It wasn't like an insurgent with an AK-47 or a roadside bomb rigged from a discarded shell. It didn't breach your position. It breached your grip on reality. It breached sound first. At 0307 hours, static crackled over the radio. I unclipped the handset from my belt, checked the frequency. It was a low hum, laced with faint popping, like someone hammering metal far away. The duty sergeant's voice cut through the noise, broken. "All posts, confirm. Status, over." I keyed the mic, "Post 3, normal, over. Your signal's bad, Sergeant. Interference." The reply was another burst of static, sharper this time, like nails scraping glass. I frowned, dialed the frequency. "Base command, Post 3, radio check, over." Silence. Then a thread-thin sound, like a woman's sob, leaking through a band that didn't belong to any assigned channel. Just a flash, so brief I thought I'd imagined it. It didn't repeat. I chalked it up to electronic jamming or a stray fragment from a village radio broadcast. But Henderson looked up. His eyes were wide. "You heard it too?" he asked, his voice dry. "Just interference," I said. "That wasn't interference," he muttered. "Interference isn't like that." I didn't ask what he meant by that woman's sob. I didn't ask because I didn't want that statement confirmed. 5 minutes later, the biological detection sensors in the southeast sector went off. Post 3 was responsible for that quadrant. We'd planted passive infrared detectors at 200, 400, and 600 meters out, paired with an N/PPS 5D ground surveillance radar and ATSID acoustic seismic sensors. The system was designed to pick up personnel movement, sensitive enough to catch a single soldier crawling through the sand. But this time, it wasn't one set of sensors tripped. All three went off at once. That meant something was moving at 200, 400, and 600 meters simultaneously, and the direction was uniform, straight toward the base. I said to Henderson, "Switch to night vision. Check the east side." Henderson receded his night vision goggles, scanning the sector from left to right in a slow, deliberate arc. I checked the sensor receiver's readings simultaneously. The vibration signals captured by the ATSID were irregular, not the rhythmic intervals of human footsteps. It was more like a sustained, low-frequency scraping sound, as if something large was dragging its body across the sand in a slithering motion. "I see something, wait!" Henderson's voice caught. He leaned forward slightly, his right hand unconsciously tightening around the rifle grip. "Describe what you see, soldier." I used a commanding tone, trying to pull him back to standard protocol. 200 meters, right side, a low-profile object, not a man. He paused. "Not a jackal either. It's too flat, like someone lying prone, but use the zoom function on the goggles," I said. "I already have it zoomed in." still can't make it out clearly. It seems to be trembling. I raised my own binocular night vision device, NN/PVS 14 monocular, far sharper in resolution. I dialed it to the southeast, sweeping across the sand blanket. Then I felt it before I saw it. A low-frequency pulse penetrated my sternum, like the vibration you feel when standing too close to a large generator. It wasn't sound, at least not what the ears hear. It acted directly on the body. My skin prickled, the nape of my neck tingled, as if someone were lightly scraping it with a fingernail. And then I saw it. In the green luminescence of the night vision scope, 200 meters out, a prone-shaped object was moving. Its silhouette was low, roughly a foot high and 4 feet wide, like a stretched hide. I couldn't distinguish head or limbs. It looked like a formless mass of something, an irregular, slightly pulsing oval, sliding across the sand with an unnatural, uniform speed. "That speed is wrong," Henderson said, his voice trembling with a near-sobbing edge. "It's not accelerating or decelerating. It's too fast. If you clock it, it's moving over 3 meters per second. What the hell crawls on sand at 3 meters per second?" I didn't have a stopwatch, but I knew he was right. The object's movement defied biological laws. No muscle contraction or relaxation, no limb motion, just smooth propulsion, as if there were no friction between it and the sand. Changed direction. No arc of turning, a 90-degree shift, instantly heading due east. That direction had no base entrance, no tactically meaningful target. It was just moving without purpose, or with a purpose we couldn't fathom. The sensors at 400 and 600 meters kept triggering. That meant 2 more objects behind it, maintaining the same spacing, changing direction simultaneously, like a formation. At the same instant, 3 sensor groups lost signal. Not triggered then faded, but started and stopped together, precise to the second. That didn't match any known signal signature. If 3 enemy infantry were approaching, they'd trigger sensors at different distances sequentially, with intervals in frequency and variance in vibration patterns. But these signals were identical, even the vibration frequencies matched, like a sound played 3 times. I grabbed the radio, pressed the transmit button. Command post, post 3. Multiple sensor triggers southeast, visual contact with unidentified object, 200 meters out, moving east. Request instructions, over. Static noise nearly drowned out the reply this time. I caught only scattered words. Orders? Stand by, repeat. Then a piercing high-frequency shriek forced me to yank the radio from my ear. The sound stung me. Not a metaphor, real pain. Like fine needles driving straight from the ear canal deep into the brain. I instinctively covered my ears, the radio slipping from my hand, dangling against my chest. Henderson let out a sound somewhere between a yell and a groan at the same moment. He pressed his hands hard over his ears beneath his helmet, his rifle dropping at his feet, the M16 clattering against the steel floor with a dull thud. "My head," he gritted out, face contorted. The searing pain was fleeting, lasting only about 3 seconds. But it left a strange, muffled pressure deep in the ear, as if something had gotten in and lodged there. I slapped the side of my ear. Nothing. The radio crackled back to normal static. The duty sergeant's voice returned, clear as if nothing had happened. "Post 3, command post, report your status, over." I reported the sensor activation and visual contact, without mentioning the pain. I can't explain why I held back. Maybe I didn't believe it myself, wasn't sure it had really happened. Maybe I'd already started following that unwritten rule of the war zone. Never report an anomaly without proof, or it leaves an irreversible mark in your file. "Could be a pack of dogs," the sergeant said. "Desert heat mirages sometimes make them look bigger than they are. Keep watching. Report any hostile activity immediately." "Copy." I set down the handset and glanced at Henderson. He was picking up his rifle, fingers still trembling faintly. I noticed his eyes were red, not the kind from crying, but the dry, strained fatigue of staring at a screen too long. "Keep watching," I repeated the sergeant's order. He didn't answer. He pulled a small bottle of eye drops from his pocket, tilted his head back, and squeezed 2 drops into each eye. That was the second time. He'd used them earlier during the shift change. I wondered if his eyes were bothering him, but I didn't ask. The desert returned to its surface calm. That thing had vanished from sight, either buried by the sand blanket or shifted into our blind spot. The sensors didn't trigger again. The night settled back into its usual rhythm. The wind, the occasional distant radio chatter, the low hum of generators from the base behind us. Outpost 3 became once more a solitary speck in the Gobi, surrounded by 20 miles of nothing but desolation. For 20 to 30 minutes, I almost convinced myself everything was normal. Maybe it really was a few stray dogs. The desert night's light and shadow, distorted by the moon's angle and the sand blanket's refraction, could trick the eye, add in the accumulated fatigue from consecutive shifts, and it was entirely possible to mistake a group of animals for a single, flat shape moving in unison. As for the vibration, maybe a friendly patrol in the distance had triggered a cascade of false alarms, or the sensors themselves were just old and faulty. All those explanations made sense. They were reasonable, but my brain had already reached the opposite conclusion before reason could even begin its calculations. The oldest part of the brain, the part that cares only about survival, not logic. It was saying, turn off the night vision. Don't look. Don't let it enter your line of sight again. Your eyes are its doorway. I didn't listen to that voice. Instead, I turned the night vision up brighter. I searched. I wanted to prove myself wrong. I wanted to confirm it was just a few wild dogs chasing each other across the sand. Southeast, nothing. No object moving, no heat signature. The wind had already smoothed over the sand tracks left at the sensor trigger point. Henderson sniffed. Then he asked the question. "You smell that?" I took a deep breath. The air was dry, bitterly cold, usually carrying the scent of dust and distant minerals. But now it held something else. An odor. First, my nose registered it. Then my brain analyzed what it was. It wasn't a single molecular signal. It came in layers, like peeling an onion. First layer, copper, the taste of fresh rust, like the metallic tang left after gripping a rusty knife handle. Second layer, rotting flesh, not the stench of advanced decay, but that sweet, sickly smell of early-stage decomposition, the kind you'd catch on the streets of Iraq, if you know what I mean. Third layer, the most unsettling, chemicals, a sharp, almost ozone-like scent, the crisp, biting quality of air right after a thunderstorm. These three smells shouldn't coexist. Not in nature. In a military environment, you might catch one or two. The rotten egg stench of hydrogen sulfide, the acrid aftertaste of burning C4, or the lingering odor of battlefield corpses. But all three, in such precise proportions, suggested not any natural phenomenon but something designed. A chemical signal engineered to stimulate human olfactory receptors, to evoke primal fear. My throat began to itch. My eyes stung faintly. Henderson felt it too. He was rubbing his eyes. "Is something burning?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Maybe the generator at command post is acting up," I said. But I knew diesel combustion didn't smell like that. I was lying to him and to myself. Southeast, a faint glimmer flashed and vanished. Not a muzzle flash, not an explosion, not a flare. It was a momentary phosphorescence, pale green, like the faint glow of rotting wood in the night, hovering about 3 feet above the ground. It lasted less than a second. Once it faded, it never returned. But in that 1 second, I saw it clearly. A silhouette on the sand to the southeast illuminated a half-crouched shape. It was difficult to describe. Its torso resembled a human's, shoulders hunched, neck unnaturally long, head somewhat deformed, like a stretched face, arms too thin, ending in no discernible hands or claws, lower limbs swallowed by the sand. It stood about 4 feet tall. Crouched, it was at waist height, but it wasn't human and certainly no animal. The detail I caught through the night vision goggles vanished into darkness a second later. Henderson hadn't seen that faint glow. He was turned sideways, attention elsewhere. I didn't tell him what I'd seen. In that moment, I chose silence. I don't know why. Maybe because I knew once I spoke it aloud, I could never take it back. It would become fact, etched into that night, into our memories, an unchangeable record. I chose to wait until dawn. But before dawn, the second incident occurred. 0321 hours. That time I'll remember forever. First, the smell intensified, thick enough to choke. Henderson retched directly over the railing of the post, his vocal cords spasming in a series of painful sounds. I nearly vomited too, stomach acid rising, burning my esophagus. Then every electronic device failed simultaneously. The night vision on my helmet, the radio in my hand, the remote monitoring screen installed at the post, Henderson's weapon-mounted tactical light, even our digital watches, anything with a screen or dependent on current went black at the same instant. Not fading, but vanishing instantly, like a giant hand had yanked our little watchtower out of the grid. Only one small emergency yellow light, powered by simple batteries, still glowed faintly. It hung from a hook on the post's ceiling, casting a dim, jaundiced light that threw our shadows against the steel walls, distorted, enormous. What the hell's going on? Henderson coughed, wiping filth from his mouth with his sleeve. No idea, I said, but my hand had already clicked on the red light attached to the foregrip of my M4 carbine. A mechanical switch, independent of any circuit board. Red light flooded the post, illuminating Henderson's face, which looked ghostly pale. I scanned around. The lights from the main base camp were gone too. The quiet, fluorescing camp from before was now a black, rectangular void swallowed by the desert. I realized the base's generator had also stopped, and that diesel generator had an independent sealed fuel system. Theoretically, as long as fuel wasn't cut, it wouldn't stop. This wasn't mechanical failure. This wasn't coincidence. It felt like something had turned it off. The wind picked up. Desert nights usually have predictable wind patterns, west to east with a worn, abrasive force, like a rough hand scraping exposed skin. But this wind was different. It came from all directions, hot then cold, spiraling without kicking up sand, just twisting into an invisible vortex in the air. I felt it seep through the gaps in the post's steel plates, the iron skin of the tower humming under its force. The emergency yellow light swung wildly on its hook, its beam sweeping across the walls, stretching our shadows into grotesque, exaggerated shapes. Then the footsteps came, the sound of walking on gravel, a rhythm heard countless times in training. Steps on loose, coarse sand and crushed stone, sharp and gritty, highly distinctive. In the dark desert, they carried far, clear, but the rhythm was wrong. In normal human walking, stride length and frequency are linked. Long strides mean low frequency. Short strides mean high frequency. These footsteps had both long strides and low frequency. Long intervals between steps, but each impact heavy and dragging, as if the foot hesitated to lift, grinding and twisting on the gravel before pulling away. And no accompanying breathing. No gir klater. No faint rattle of magazines in tactical vests. Just a solitary set of footsteps circling our little tower. Henderson gripped his rifle tight. His knuckles were white in the red light. "We need to call for backup," he whispered. "Radio's dead," I said. "Then pop a flare. We only launch flares when hostile action is confirmed. The rules of engagement are clear." "Does the rules of engagement cover what to do in a situation like this?" Henderson's voice pitched higher. "If something, anything cuts power to the entire base, does that still count as a hostile act?" I didn't answer him, because in that moment, the footsteps stopped. Right beneath us, 10 feet down through steel plate and sandbags. Breathing, rising up from under the floor. A heaving, wet respiration like someone with severe lung disease struggling to draw air. Each inhale dragged long and thin. Each exhale came out as a murky gurgle of bubbles, as if its throat were filled with some viscous fluid, and the air was forcing itself through that thick slime. I could hear every motion of that liquid, bubbles expanding, bursting, reforming. The sound reminded me of a drowning cow I'd seen as a kid on the farm, gasping at the edge of a mud pit. But it was so close, just an inch or two of steel plate beneath my boots. Henderson began backing up, his spine hitting the northern wall of the post. He raised his muzzle toward the floor, the barrel shaking violently. "It's under us," he was almost whispering. "I know." My voice didn't sound like my own. Too calm, calm as if I were reading off a duty log that had nothing to do with me. But that was just a thin shell. Beneath it, every nerve ending in my body was screaming. My body wanted to do something, run, shoot, or curl into a ball, but my training and reason held those impulses down, telling me, you're a Marine corporal, you're in charge of this post, you still have to get this new guy back to the base alive. You can't break. I grabbed Henderson's shoulder and pressed down hard, pushing him from the peak of panic back to a more manageable level. It worked. His body stiffened for a second, then slumped noticeably. He was still trembling, but no longer looked ready to bolt out the door. And then we heard the voice, language, rising from under the floor, muffled and distorted by steel and sandbags, but unmistakably a language. It was English, but spoken as if by someone who'd learned it from scratch without ever living among humans. Every word was enunciated with meticulous care, stress placed on the wrong syllables, the cadence all wrong. What it said was, "Come in. You there. I see you." I know what you're thinking. You're thinking it was someone's prank, a drunk buddy, or militants trying to psych out the sentries with psychological warfare. That was my first thought too. I forced my mind down that path. This is human. This is someone who speaks English. He's trying to infiltrate the base. But that assumption shattered almost instantly. The reason was simple. The voice was repeating. Not repeating over and over like a loop, not a recording, not mechanical repetition. It was learning. The first time it said the sentence, it used the wrong pitch, pronouncing C like a completely unrelated word. By the fourth time, it had fine-tuned the details of pronunciation. The U became softer, the C more precise. By the eighth time, it sounded almost like a suburban New Haven accent, carrying a soft, ominous cadence. Each time, it sounded more human than the last. It listened to us, likely extracting vocabulary and tonal templates from the radio, and in that incredibly short span, it recalibrated itself. That was a speed of language sample evolution that couldn't happen naturally. This thing wasn't using language, it was deconstructing and reconstructing it. When it repeated for the 10th time, the voice was so clear it seemed like those few inches of steel plate didn't exist. Derek Henderson, you there. I see you. Said his name. Said his full name. Henderson's face went from fear to ashen gray in 1 second. His mouth opened, then closed, like a fish yanked out of water. His gaze flickered from my face to the floor, then back to my face, his eyes brimming with something on the edge of collapse. It knows my name. His voice trembled. My name. It knows my name. And then it hit me we weren't wearing name tags. Desert night duty didn't require reflective name tags. They compromised concealment. Henderson's combat shirt chest was clean. Had he given his name over the radio? No. That night, he'd only spoken once. When we first detected the sensor trigger, I'd called his name, but it was a low whisper, the radio never on. Every conversation inside that tower was for our ears alone, unless it already knew, unless it had been listening long before we noticed. Or even earlier, perhaps back in some night in Abilene, Texas, when Henderson was a high school kid, his name had somehow entered its ledger. The thought was absurd. I fought to suppress it, but it kept growing. My training told me, do something now. I grabbed an emergency flare gun, that old M8 smoke signal launcher, pure mechanical, no power needed. I slid open the roof hatch above the post, aimed the barrel straight up, and squeezed the trigger. A red flare shot into the night sky. In the brief seconds as it peaked and began to descend, the entire desert was drenched in blood-red light. Under that flickering, shifting glow, I saw it, below Tower 3, pressed tight against the steel base, crouched a figure. It was humanoid, but its limbs twisted in ways that defied joint anatomy, like a spider curled inside a glass jar. Its skin color was impossible to discern, because under the red flare, everything looked as raw as flesh. But I saw its eyes, two golden glints reflecting the crimson, staring up at the tower, meeting mine directly. Its face wasn't a face. It had the shape of one. Eye sockets, a protrusion where a nose should be, a slit for a mouth. But these features lacked any normal proportion or depth. They didn't belong on the same face, as if 3 or 4 different faces had been pressed together, each contributing a piece to form a near-human surface. That eye wasn't centered in its socket. It was shifted left, with a pupillary distance no human could have. The nose area was too sunken, like a plaster model smashed and glued back together. The mouth was open. It seemed to be saying something, but as the flare rose, wind and combustion noise swallowed every detail. I only saw that mouth opening and closing repeatedly. The gape was extreme, the jaw dropping far beyond the limits of a human temporomandibular joint. The flare began its parabolic fall. The red light faded. Darkness reclaimed the earth. In the instant before the light vanished completely, that creature departed in a grotesque fashion. It didn't turn, didn't stand, didn't move like any vertebrate. It simply collapsed, like clothes slipping off a hanger. Then that mass dragged itself rapidly southeast, vanishing beneath the sand blanket within seconds, leaving only a shallow trace quickly filled by the wind. The red light died. The desert returned to its gray-black. The emergency yellow lamp still swayed above us. Henderson leaned against the wall, eyes shut, muttering a phrase I couldn't quite catch, probably part of the Lord's Prayer. I wanted to report, but at that moment all the electronics came back to life simultaneously. Night vision flickered green again. The radio chirped a crisp alert. The base's searchlights flashed twice and relit, like a convalescent reopening their eyes. The radio crackled with the duty sergeant's voice. Tower 3, did you just launch a flare? Report your status, over. Repeat, report your status. I pressed the transmit button, opened my mouth, but couldn't utter a word, because I didn't know what to say. How could I describe what just happened? That we'd seen a non-human entity speaking English, and it had called out Henderson's name? That would only have us pulled from the front to the rear, straight to psychological evaluation. Best case, we'd be labeled with a collective hallucination and reassigned to clerical duties. Worst case, shipped home, branded with a combat theater psychological disorder code, serving out the rest of our enlistment. That was not the most terrifying part. The most terrifying part was that even if I spoke up, and even if command believed me, what could they actually do? Deploy a search team into the desert to find something that could shut down a diesel generator, learn English in minutes, and shout your full name? Conventional military force was meaningless against this. Every certainty we had been taught about the world since childhood, the laws of physics, biological classifications, rational cognition, had been shaken to its core that night. I cleared my throat and spoke into the radio. Outpost 3 to command post. Just observed an unauthorized individual approaching the perimeter. Single entity, fleeing east. Request area search at first light. No engagement. Post personnel safe. Over. That was all I could manage. The sergeant paused for a moment. Received. Maintain observation. Over. Henderson opened his eyes and looked at me. In his gaze was something I had never seen in this Texas boy before. Understanding. He understood why I lied. He also understood how that lie would forever sit in the silence between us. The remaining hours of that night stretched like centuries. We never saw the creature again, and the sensors never triggered. The wind died down. The smell dissipated. Everything returned to a state as if nothing had ever happened, as if the desert itself had chosen to swallow the secret. The separation came in December. Henderson was hit by an IED during a routine patrol and was medevaced back home. I never saw him again. Before his helicopter lifted off, he left me a cassette tape, unlabeled, slipped directly into my personal gear bag. I didn't find it until days later, when I played it alone in my tent. The audio quality was poor. The background carried wind and an unidentified scraping sound. Henderson's voice sounded 10 years older than it had that night on watch. I've been digging. I asked my grandfather. He's on the Navajo reservation. When I showed him the movement pattern, he went quiet at the third turn. After a long time, he said that direction led to a place. They call it the Forbidden Land, not a name you'll find on any map passed down from much earlier times. He told me that thing wears a skin, but that's not what it really is. It borrows skin to walk, borrows voices to speak. If you see it, it sees you. It never forgets. The recording cut out for a few seconds. Then Henderson's voice returned, very soft. I've been having nightmares lately, vivid ones. Stands outside my window calling my name. When I wake up, the window is open. I don't remember opening it. Yesterday, when I went to get my meds, the doctor asked if I'd had encephalitis as a kid. I said no. He said I was running a fever, but the inflammation markers showed no pathogen. He scribbled a line on the pre-diagnosis sheet. I caught a glimpse. Systemic inflammatory response of unknown origin. I asked him what that meant. He didn't answer. Then came a longer silence, followed by the click of auto shutdown. I tried to contact Henderson afterward. His mother answered, saying he wasn't available, that his condition didn't allow visitors. When I called again, the number was disconnected. Others at Outpost Victor gradually sensed something was wrong. While on duty at the operations center after my recovery, I noticed a pattern in the intelligence reports. Roughly every 10 days, some post would report anomalous sensor activations, followed by 1 to 2 hours of equipment paralysis. Each report was filed as electronic countermeasure interference, attributed to possible new enemy jamming devices. But all those reports shared one thing. Off the record, the duty personnel would mention things never entered into official files. They'd talk about a certain smell, footsteps, something outside mimicking their voices. You will never find these in the official archives. No one is allowed to discuss such things. In military culture, admitting you saw something inexplicable is tantamount to admitting your judgment has suffered irreversible failure. Commanders rely on your judgment to make decisions. If your judgment is questioned, you cease to be a reliable combat unit. So everyone chooses to shut up, pack those memories away, stuff them into some vault in the deepest recesses of the mind, and pretend they never existed. I tried that, but over the years, during those sleepless nights at 2 or 3 in the morning, I found myself replaying that night, not as a memory, but like a signal that needed deciphering. After spending hundreds of hours on it, I distilled one question that chilled me to the bone. Why did it come? It didn't attack us, didn't breach the perimeter, didn't commit any act that could be defined as direct hostility. It only observed, only mimicked, only stood beneath us at close range after cutting the power, calling out the name of one of the new recruits. This wasn't an assault. This was reconnaissance. Just like how we pre-survey a target area, test defensive responses, map the terrain, sample the environment and communication frequencies, assess the enemy's weaponry and discipline. It was gathering information, and whose information it was gathering, why, and how it would use it, we knew nothing. Henderson said one thing at the end of his tape. I remember every word to this day. He said, "They're not from here. They disguise themselves as something from here. But when you face them head-on, that part of you belonging to the ancient world recognizes them. That thing is older than humanity. It knows our names because it was here watching us be born." He was running a fever then. You could call it delirium, but I've heard enough rambling to tell the difference between nonsense and something else. When he spoke those words, Henderson's voice was steady. He wasn't guessing. He was relaying a fact he'd been forced to accept. That truth, carved into the earth since he was a barefoot boy running across a Texas farm, now stood in military uniform in the middle of the desert, using his full name to confirm it to him. I don't believe this in daylight, but if you put me in the desert at dawn, kill all the lights, hand me a low battery night vision scope and a 19-year-old recruit, then fill my lungs with that smell of rusted steel mixed with rotting flesh and ozone, I'll tell you, that's no myth. That's alive. Those restricted zones, marked in red on old maps, and the warnings from indigenous people saying, "Don't call out the names of people you know into the wilderness at night." They weren't superstition. They were early warning systems left by those who dealt with it long before us. I stayed in the reserve training unit for 3 more years before I mustered out. On my discharge papers, the psychiatric evaluation had one line: exhibits mild hypervigilance tendencies, sleep disturbances, further evaluation recommended. I never went for evaluation. I folded that paper and tucked it into my wallet, into a pocket I almost never open. Last year, I saw a video on YouTube of an outdoor expedition team in some desert in New Mexico. The footage was shot at night, poor quality, so grainy you could barely make anything out. But at the 23-minute mark, one of the team members suddenly stopped, shining his flashlight at a small patch of low shrubs in the distance. "What is that?" he asked. The cameraman adjusted the zoom, and on screen appeared a low, flattened shape, irregular, quivering slightly, then sliding out of the frame in under a second without making a sound. In the background, someone muttered, "Impossible." Then the video cut out. When it resumed, everyone was in the RV, and no one mentioned what came before. In the comments, someone said it was a badger crushed by a car struggling in the sand. Someone said it was a smudge on the lens. Someone said it was a motion artifact from digital zoom. But there was also one comment, just a single line with no likes or replies, buried alone at the bottom of thousands of discussions. It read, "Don't call its name." I closed the video. Outside my window was the gray winter sky of Arkansas and a very ordinary suburban lawn. Everything was quiet, normal, free of danger. But my hands hovered over the keyboard for a long time, unable to type a single word, because I know that some borders aren't physical. They're borders of perception, a dotted line drawn jointly by our senses and cognition. On this side, a world you can understand, predict, and handle with an infantry manual. On the other side, a world that doesn't care if you exist but occasionally notices you, greets you by name. We humans think we're the only observers on this planet. We're wrong, and I think they know we're wrong. They're exploiting that mistake. This is what I saw that night while standing watch at Victor Outpost. You can choose to believe it's the delayed onset trauma of an old soldier playing tricks on me. Or you can choose to believe that something was indeed out there, arriving in this desert long before we did, and quietly observing every one of us while we fancied ourselves the masters. But if you're a young Marine driving a Humvee across a desert highway, or a lone traveler backpacking through the no man's land of the Gobi, when the radio emits a low hum, when the air suddenly carries a whiff of copper rust mingled with rotting flesh and ozone, when you feel the low-frequency vibrations from the ground seem to be tracing the pulse of a creature older than your own fear itself, I hope you remember what you've heard tonight, and I hope you never need to use it, because when you truly see it, it has already seen you. And when it calls your name, do not answer. Never answer. Don't look at it, don't speak to it, don't let it know you've detected its presence. Maybe that will buy you a few more nights in a reality it could upend at any moment. If one day, at the green-tinted edge of your night vision, you catch the shape of something that shouldn't exist, remember, IT wasn't human. It was not human. It was not any life known to humanity. It was an ancient mist that deliberately wears a form, and it has known us for a very, very long time. The question left for you is this: what lurks in the darkness outside your window at 3 in the morning? And are you certain it's just darkness?